Good evening and welcome to Zion's Banner. We have been going through Matthew through Jewish eyes, and we've now reached the section in Matthew where we're going to have to discuss Jesus' death. Atonement is a chief issue for the Jewish person, and so not only does the section that we're dealing with important in a general way, but it has some ramifications specifically. And so we're going to take a look at the events surrounding and geography surrounding Jesus's death. And then we're going to ask what Jesus's death really did and what it really didn't do, and take a look at that also. So for those who have not tuned in yet, this is really kind of an important show. I hope people will tune in later because the atonement is really important to our faith. I do want to point out something. There has been a lot of people affected by COVID, and some of them who I don't blame. We've lost some patronage on our Patreon channel. And so I want to encourage people, if you're watching this or watch it later, and you're not a patron and you're not supporting us through Chosen People, to consider going ahead and becoming a patron. So I'm going to shoot that up there. Times change, and so I just want to put that up there real quick and encourage it. Others can encourage it later on. I've got some great moderators, and so they often do that for me. I'm going to go to screen share. There is no sound clip with this because we're just going to be doing exegesis tonight, which means the study of the scriptures. We're not going to be doing anything else. And you're going to see I got smaller as the print got bigger. And that's my way of making sure that you can see the slides and what we'll be discussing. So let's dig in and start to deal with things. And a little bit of announcement afterwards, because this weekend is a big weekend in a lot of ways. Let me take you to the section we're in so that you can open your Bibles there. You might say, where is that? And then we'll start looking particularly. We have gotten past the part where Jesus has been turned over to be crucified. Pilate has done his thing. He has really kind of done his expediency. Judas has done his thing. Let me make this bigger. And Jesus has been turned over to be killed. So if you're wondering where we are in the text, we are in verse 26 of Matthew 27. That's where we're going to find ourselves. And that really begins the narrative around Jesus's actual crucifixion. You will see in 26 that they released Barabbas. And when they had scourged Jesus, they delivered him to be crucified. And that's where we're going to go for our first point. So we're in the section of 26 to 31, but we're looking at that first section, that first pericope. We see that they scourged Jesus. They delivered him to be crucified, which means he was scourged and beaten. We're going to discuss that a little more before he was crucified, but just to get the order of events. Then the soldiers of the government took Jesus into the praetorium, that's a particular area, and gathered the whole garrison around him. So he's been kind of ganged up by the Roman soldiers. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him. Now that's after they scourged him, just to get the order of events. And then they put a twisted crown of thorns on his brow and a reed in his right hand. The indication is that they knocked or placed that crown of thorns in tightly, pressing it in order to create some additional pain and bleeding. They put a reed in his right hand. That's supposed to stand for a scepter in a sort of mocking sort of way. They bowed the knee before him and mocked him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews." Then they spat on him and took the reed and struck him on the head. That's where the crown of thorns is. Okay. And they had mocked him. They took off the robe, put his own clothes on him, and led him away to be crucified. Now, that's the first section that we're dealing with here. Now, before we can answer what Jesus did in his death, what it accomplished, we need to look at the narrative of his death. So that's why I'm looking at the actual narrative. And I want to help us understand. Now, this is pretty gruesome. I always say my videos aren't for kids because we're going to discuss some real adult topics, but you need to understand. I read a paper on the medical implications of the crucifixion. It was very gruesome. This is going to be slightly gruesome just so that we get a feel for the physical events of the crucifixion, also known as the Passion. You can see that the Roman Empire flagellation was a precursor. So this came before crucifixion. You already underwent, shall we say, torture before the torture of crucifixion. In this context, it's sometimes referred to as scourging. You're going to see a slightly different term there being used. And of course, this is the passage that really makes this all kind of famous in a negative way, or infamous. This was not the normal whipping with just leather straps. This is designed to do some things, like a lot of damage. It had bones. It had pieces of metal. The idea was to create a ripping with the whipping. So when the whip comes down, it actually grabs pieces of flesh and tears them. If it were to wrap around the back and maybe hit the eye, it could indeed create trauma to the eye. In addition, it caused severe pain, but also what it did was bring someone closer to what's called hypovolemic shock due to loss of blood. So before the crucifixion, the person has already lost a certain amount of blood. Now, I actually did go to Wikipedia for this because really a lot of the material, even in Logos, does not discuss this in detail because this is really kind of gross stuff. I remember seeing the movie The Passion of the Christ, and it came close to what's going on here as far as a physiological way of dealing with things. Now, do I have some things that I think could have been done better? Mel Gibson, yes. I do not believe the Catholic myth about the woman named Veronica, who supposedly gets known as Saint Veronica. Very nice for people who are named Veronica, but I don't believe some of the Catholic mythology that was woven in. There are some other problems with the betrayal, but as far as the actual physical beating, as much as it was possible to do that and demonstrate what that looked like, they did a pretty good job. It was a horrible process even before. Now, they put the crown of thorns. They beat him with the reed on the head where the crown of thorns is. And that would also open up more bleeding. And I don't know if people realize it, but you have a whole lot of veins in your head. Those with a medical background will know that head wounds can be extremely serious, both opened and enclosed, because there's a good deal of blood supply that goes to our face where our sensory organs are and to our head where our brain is. And just to let you know that there would be more blood loss. So there's this blood loss going on. There's a lot of pain involved here before we ever get to crucifixion. Now, why do I do this? Because before we can again talk about what Jesus's death did, we have to actually understand physiologically a little bit of what's going on here. But it isn't just physical. There's mockery going on here. People are having a good deal of fun with the mocking involved. There is contemptuous behavior here that is designed to debilitate along with the physical pain, to crush the spirit of one. And remember that Isaiah 53 predicts that Messiah will be despised and forsaken. And so that description there is fulfilled in a lot of what goes on here. Now, there are Jews who want to deny that this incident relates to Messiah at all. But interestingly enough, as I pointed out before, the Talmud refers to Messiah as the leprous one, not because he had leprosy, but because leprosy was associated with divine judgment and suffering. And so there are clear references to Messiah as the leprous one. I want you to notice the title, Hail King of the Jews. That is not acknowledging Jesus's messiahship. It is nasty, rotten, mocking. That's why the reed is given. The idea is to say, oh, really? Oh, King of the Jews, look at you. You really gained victory. You are nothing. You have failed. You are going to be horribly killed. We have demonstrated our power and authority over you and done what we wanted with you. Beyond the cruelty of the mocking, there is designed to be additional feeling of helplessness. Rome wanted to send a clear message in this whole process, not just in the crucifixion, but in the process itself, that they were large and in charge, and you better not mess with that. Now, there are a few things that we can learn before we even get to what Jesus' death meant, because at this point, he's busy losing blood in extreme pain. He has not even had to carry the cross yet. His clothes have been put on him, and so that he will be led away, and he does not get a carriage to the cross or a stretcher. He indeed has to travel there on his own steam. There are some interesting lessons here. Jesus would have been in an entirely different place and viewed entirely differently if he had kicked Rome out and got the Sanhedrin to recognize his kingship. In fact, at that point, he would have been idolized. Remember that when he enters the city during the triumphal entry, the tone is triumphal and wonderful, and he would have kept that tone if indeed he had gone ahead and kicked Rome out and basically got himself recognized, or basically told the Sanhedrin he was ruling, and exercised his messianic power in order to go ahead and take possession of the throne and take power. He would have been a hero. In fact, Judaism to this day would have hailed him as a hero if he had gone ahead and done that. So Jesus is allowing himself to undergo this. It does not get him the popularity and adulation that he would have gotten if the same divine authority was used to go ahead and seize power. And I want to say that that's basically the way the fallen world is. And I made the comment that the world wants leaders who are successful as opposed to faithful, who gain achievement or fame as opposed to seek peace and demonstrate integrity. Jesus was despised because he didn't get the job done by force. He could have. That would have caused the adulation of the crowds. Hail the victor who kicks Rome out, who gives us everything we've been expecting. Wow, you have done it. And if he had exercised that divine authority, he could have created the terror on the part of the Romans easily enough. He doesn't do it. So what does that tell us about our world? Our world will pick leaders according to the wrong qualifications. Now, a moral and informed people will do better, but I look at what's passing for celebrity nowadays, and I'm pretty grossed out. So if you're a follower of the Kardashians, sorry, they aren't what I'm looking for. And so that's what you see from a fallen world. And so a fallen world had no use for a leader like Jesus. There are many that will hail him and say Jesus had great things to say about love and was a great leader. Well, you know what? The people in Jesus's day who wanted to be saved from Rome didn't think he was that great a leader. And Moses Maimonides writes him off because he didn't do that. So the church should not be operating like the world, right? Well, unfortunately, it happens. I see a lot of church leaders who are large and in charge, big and bold, glitzy and popular. If such men are polished, they often gain positions of power, not because they have the spiritual goods. And I know that to be the case. So I'm going to make a strong statement. because the church should not operate like the world. Now, I'm giving a caveat. I don't know a single deacon who's a perfect deacon as far as the qualifications. And I don't know a single elder who is perfect in his meeting the qualifications of elders, because we are all given to sin and weakness. Having said that, there are qualifications given in the Bible for those leadership positions for a reason. And the church suffers when those aren't paid attention to. So no man should be on the deacon board who does not in some way model the qualifications necessary. No elder should come up that does not come up to the standards of elders and ongoing work, that you see these characteristics beginning to develop in this person and continuing to develop, should ever be on an elder board. And I don't care how much money he gives to the church or how nice a guy is or how influential he is. And I was in a church situation in which an influential man got into a position that did some damage, and the church did indeed suffer for it. Shout out to Jack Ray. You'll find it an interesting program as we look at Jesus's death and some of the things it teaches us and what it accomplished and why. I talked to my son. My son is I think the term would be millennial, but I'm trying to remember because now they've changed the generational term. He's a young man, 30s. But he has had experiences in the church, being kind of an MK, a minister's kid, so to speak, but not a pastor's kid. And he is paying very close attention to the fringe young people he meets that want very little to do with Christianity, because he's worked in some settings where he's gotten to talk to people and also listens to some of the problems that young people are having with the church. And so conversations with him are interesting, because I get the perspective of unsaved young people coming up and how they feel about the church. And he said that one of the big problems that he is finding with people who were raised in the church, maybe as kids, but now are in his age bracket, is that they're writing the church off because of a rotten disregard for biblical standards in some areas, but strongly enforcing standards in other areas. I will be dealing with one of these TikTok things, which deals with the Hebrew next Wednesday. I'm going to take a little break from our Maimonides and the Messianic lens, because I want to go through the three offices in the scriptures, and take some time with them and really show how Jesus is kind of embedded through looking at those three offices. So I'm going to do a little bit more digging, and I wanted to actually deal with what a young person sees when they see in the church, because I grew up in a more traditional generation. And so I wanted to actually take a young person's concern. And so I'm going to deal with these. But I have to say that a lot of the people he runs into, we create our own monsters because they see the discrepancy with some things being highly enforced and other things not being enforced. And it creates a real problem for them. And so that's just to say that. We find out that Jesus is going to go ahead and have somebody carry his cross, because he's going to collapse, probably because of the beginning of blood loss, the pain, and other things that were going on. Okay? And so they find a man to be the cross bearer. Now, he doesn't volunteer for it. They press him into service. I want you to see the Greek word compelled here, and it's highlighted. And we can do what we usually do with Logos. There's no reason not to. Requisitioned, and there's the Greek word. If I pull up a quick word study, there you go. To compel somebody to carry a load or press them to carry a load. I'm going to bring this up a little bit better for you. That's to let you know that the gentleman from Cyrene is not anxious to go ahead and do that. But he is compelled to by the Roman soldiers, and he really can't say no. And so who is this Cyrene, and what is a Cyrene anyway, and where is that located? And so I wanted to take a little time to introduce this character and be a little bit more exegetical. It's on the coast of Africa, Cyrenaica. It was founded in the 8th century by the Greeks, so it predates the Romans, who engaged primarily in agricultural pursuits. Herodotus comments in the 5th century BC that the land of Cyrene is the highest part of Libya. So it's the area near Libya and inhabited by nomads. Its remarkably peculiarity is 3 growing seasons. So it was good for agriculture. And so they ended up having a really nice climate. It's conquered by Alexander the Great in 331 BC and later becomes part of the Roman Empire. During the period of the New Testament, the city contained a large Jewish population that came from Alexandria and migrated over. One such person was named Simon, and he was visiting Jerusalem during Passover. Now, don't miss that. Passover was one of the pilgrim feasts, and so Jews were expected to return to Jerusalem for 3 feasts a year, in which they were to appear before the Lord not empty-handed. Remember that this is occurring during Passover, and so there is good reason why Simon could be looked at as a Cyrenian, a Jew who ended up coming there. And the guys who are online can let me know if the quality gets too bad. I'm starting to see some flitting around with the quality, and I hope it doesn't go down any further. They had more problems with that due to the monsoons and the heat here. So that gives you an idea. Now, why does this even become important? Well, it becomes important because, Okay, there we go. It becomes important because certain groups like the Hebrew Israelites will try to use the fact that Simon is from North Africa to try and state that Jews were originally Africans and that the modern Jews are pretenders, and a whole host of other ridiculous things. If one pays attention to history, one would know that that particular area had a large Mideastern population because Alexandria had developed a large Mideastern population. Understand also that there are no few Romans in that territory, and anyone that Romans had grabbed. So the idea that Cyrenia was a African city only composed of Africans, and this proves the Jews were originally Africans and the Jews today are fakers, is really ignoring history. So if any BHI guys pull this, it doesn't work. What's interesting is that some powerful preachers of the gospel of salvation through faith in Jesus Christ come out of this territory. In Acts 11:20, we read some of them were men from Cyprus, that's an island between Greece and Turkey, and Cyrene, who when they had come to Antioch spoke to the Hellenists, preaching the Lord Jesus. So there's some real missionaries early on that end up out of this group. Simon is mentioned here. Why? Why does Matthew mention Simon of Cyrene other than to just tell us someone carried the cross? Well, I don't think it's incidental to someone carrying the cross. We will find out later. Well, we will find out in this passage. It's noted in some of the Gospels that Simon is the father of Rufus and Alexander. In fact, Matthew mentions it, which sets up for New Testament history because Rufus and Alexander are going to be mentioned later. So this is highly convenient for the continued flow of biblical history outside of just the Gospels and later on, in which these two are going to become more prominent. Remember, they witnessed the crucifixion and probably what came beyond that. We all know that Jesus died at Golgotha or Calvary, but do we know where it is and why it has 2 names? We should. Calvary is the Latin, Golgotha is the Aramaic. And so there's a little article here. Now, the problem is getting it. The Aramaic means basically the skull, which has helped individuals try to theorize exactly where this location was, because that's what the hillside looked like. Not incredibly attractive. Now, you say, well, where's the Latin come from? Well, it comes from the same word, And so that's why you have that. There's a translation from the Aramaic, Greek to the Latin. Remember that Jerome does the Vulgate. The later church fathers have little or no acquaintance with Greek at all, which is really bad news. They're known as your Latin fathers. The further you move away from any scholarship that has connection to the original languages, it is not a good thing. Now, there are two Jerusalem localities associated, and I'm going to show you where they are, with, and hang in there, we will get into what Jesus' death means. But there's a historic context to this whole thing. There are two. One is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the popular one for Orthodox and Catholics. The other is Gordon's Calvary, which is where I went when I visited Israel, which is also known as the Garden Tomb. The location in either case is important because it was visible from the main road and heading out of Jerusalem, so it could be seen. And the Romans used this to demonstrate what they were capable of. Cross us and you're next. I mean, that's the whole person of crucifixion. It's to be ugly. It's cruel. You don't want to go through it. And you're willing not to cross Rome in order to avoid this thing. Now, again, my sources are named. So you see the New Bible Dictionary there. Good source. I wanted you to see a picture of what this looks like. I can't make it much bigger, but I can use the power of a pointer, particularly a laser pointer, to show you these two locations. So let me pull this up. This is the traditional location here that the Catholics regard. Now I want you to see where things are located here. Okay. You have the temple located here. You have the Antonio Fortress, which look down on the temple courtyard here. You go out this gate. Here's the valley. Okay. And then you see the traditional site. Now, this is the one we went to, which is Golgotha, which is the Garden Tomb. Okay. And so you have that. And those are the two locations. Understand where things are. You know, look at that. Look at where Jerusalem is. Look at where the Sheep Gate is. And the Antonio Fortress. Okay. And then the Herod's Palace. Remember, Jesus spent some time at Herod's Palace. So that gives you kind of a locational look at things. I do want to kind of get rid of that laser pointer. It's not serving a point anymore. I may be stuck with it, right? Well, we'll just go on from here. What is he given to drink? He is not given a refreshing Coca-Cola. He is given gall. Understand that most likely gall was meant to deaden pain and everything else and help hasten death. That's as kind as the Romans got with the whole thing. It's associated in the Bible with unfaithfulness to God because it's bitter. So I just put the utter gall. But he's given that. It's a mocking sort of thing to deaden the pain. But it's not meant just as a kindness. All right, now let's talk about what Jesus experienced. Let's go back to our text first. Okay? When they came to the place of Golgotha, they gave him gall, and then they crucified him and divided his garments. Now, we're not going to discuss the dividing of garments. We're going to discuss what really happened when Jesus was crucified. What really went on? What really happened? What was accomplished? So if you hang in there, you're going to get that discussion. Now, this gets kind of interesting. Now, I am going to go to Hebrews. We know he was crucified. Matthew doesn't discuss what that crucifixion did at that point. Matthew is depending upon the use of prophecy, the fact he was Messiah, and the connection of his suffering prophetically with Messiah as far as its purpose. So places like Isaiah 53 would have been big places to go. I'm going to go to Hebrews. Now, why am I going to Hebrews? Well, it's the second most Jewish writing in the New Testament in a sense. It's written to a Jewish audience. Now, it's written post-resurrection, prior to 70 AD, but in explaining to a Jewish audience what Matthew's audience had to understand, this is what Hebrews ends up saying. We see him, Jesus, who was made lower than the angels for the suffering of death, crowned with glory and honor, that he, by the grace of God, might what? Taste death for everyone. Wait a minute. What does it mean he tasted death for everyone? What's going on here? When Jesus died, what happened? What did he taste for mankind? How was he a substitute for us? And this gets into the very issue of atonement and what it means. So I'm going to actually go ahead and do this and actually go through this. The phrase tasted death might sound like, you know, he got a smidgen of a taste of whatever death is like. And there's the actual Greek. It occurs in the Gospels, but it doesn't occur in any other ancient Greek literature, interestingly enough. It is used in Hebrews 11:5, the exact same epistle, and it has the idea of experiencing death. So Jesus experienced death. Well, he experienced death for who? This is why I'm not really big on limited atonement. Okay, why am I not really big on limited atonement? Do I believe Jesus' death? Am I a universalist? No, I'm not a universalist. I don't believe Jesus' death guaranteed salvation for those who don't accept him. But here's the problem as I go to Hebrews, and I'm going to go there. Okay, I want to show you what Jesus did. I mean, I think that's terribly important to look at what Jesus did. Who did Jesus end up? What did his atonement cover? Sufficiency-wise, there's a difference between sufficiency and efficiency. Efficiency has to do with what Jesus' death effectively causes to happen. Sufficiently deals with what Jesus' death, how big it was, what it could accomplish. And I want you to see basically the Greek here. Okay, pantos, from which is just the Greek word for everyone. Okay, every, all. I don't believe Jesus' death saves everyone apart from receiving it, but I do believe it was sufficient to save everyone. Okay, I'm going to go here because this is where I should be. But what is this death? What death did he experience? My dad died. My dad didn't die. Sorry. My mom died. My dad's 91. Praise God, he's still alive. My mom died. I was at her bedside, pretty much. My grandparents died. I mean, they died. What is this death that Jesus tasted for everyone, that covers everyone? What are we talking about here, and how do we understand this? It has to be real death, and it has to be the death that everyone faces, okay, apart from salvation. Why do I say apart from salvation? Because Jesus experienced the wrath of God for us. Okay? He who knew no sin was made sin for us. The sin of the world was placed upon Jesus. Therefore, he experienced God's reaction to sin in terms of human sin to the full. That's because I don't worry about whether my cat sins, although I could swear sometimes it's a spiteful cat. All right. But I believe that every sin, human sin, Jesus paid for. That's the basis for me forgiving others as Christ has forgiven me. The fact the cross paid for their sin. Now, is it applied? It's not applied, but it was sufficient to pay for their sin. Let me be clear about that. The penalty for everyone's sin fell upon Jesus. Now, we aren't far enough to the crucifixion to see Jesus' reaction on the cross. So one could say it's not fair for me to go to that, but I am informed from the Gospels that Jesus did actually cry out, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? That's significant because it's Psalm 22. Whatever it was Jesus experienced, that is death. That is death, both physically and spiritually. Otherwise, Jesus did not experience the penalty for sin fully. There's some part of the penalty of sin then that Jesus did not experience. In some way, somehow, the penalty for sin either was experienced fully by Jesus or Jesus' death did not go far enough to experience that. Well, what does that mean for me? Well, I'm going to carefully broach this. When I look for what God's judgment means, I look at what Jesus experienced on the cross and when he died. In other words, a messianic lens causes me to try and look to understanding that experience through what the God-man experienced. If death is annihilation, it means the moment Jesus died on the cross, he was annihilated. I mean, doesn't that make sense? If spiritual death or God's judgment is annihilation, Jesus experienced God's judgment, then Jesus would have experienced annihilation. Well, that kind of creates a problem, doesn't it? It creates some confusion for me. Because then who resurrects and how does he resurrect? And what does that resurrection mean? Well, that would mean that the Father reconstituted him in order to raise him from the dead again. Well, that's a little perplexing to me too. Well, maybe there's something I'm missing. Maybe it was just Jesus' human soul that was annihilated and his divine nature continued to exist. Therefore, he wasn't annihilated completely. And God just reconstituted the human part of Jesus. I mean, someone could say that. That would be a way to go. You could say that, only part of Jesus died and then the rest was reconstituted. So he continued to exist and didn't cease to exist because the divine nature in him continued. And then the human nature was just reconstituted. So there was not a moment when Jesus didn't exist. Well, now I ponder through that and I say, well, where does that take me? Well, this would mean Jesus continued to exist, but did he continue to exist as the God-man? I mean, what exactly was he the minute he ceased to have a human nature and only had a divine nature? From what I could gather through simple reasoning, he would have ceased to be the God-man. And he would have just been his divine nature. And then another human soul, which would also be Jesus, which was not the Jesus who died on the cross, because this is a reconstituted soul. So logically, it's not the exact same soul that experienced that, because that soul ceased to exist. Would have been reconstituted and put back together with that divine nature, and then he would have been the God-man again. Okay, the problem is, my understanding of Jesus as the God-man is that Jesus was the God-man from the point of his incarnation until the point where he is now, as the right hand of the Father. He's still the God-man. I mean, that's my understanding of the Council of Chalcedon, the basic understanding we have of the hypostatic union, which is the way Jesus' two natures come together. Those definitions and even the biblical account doesn't seem to indicate a reconstitution at any point that I can find. Now, and Jack Ray's pointing out a good point. That would mean that Jesus' human soul had to exist after the point he died. Now, one could say, well, Jesus was righteous. Yes, he was righteous, but God placed all the sin on the world on him. So whatever God's reaction to sin was, Jesus experienced all of God's reaction towards human sin. In other words, he who knew no sin became sin for us, according to the Apostle Paul. Therefore, Jesus experienced God's full penalty on sin. So while he was righteous, he was still undergoing the penalty that any human being who sinned against the Father would indeed experience. There are a lot of reasons that I am constrained. I'm not telling other people what they believe. I'm constrained in my teaching, personally and in my teaching, to oppose annihilationism. This is one that really gives me trouble, because death has been defined for us through Jesus's death. Divine judgment has been defined for us through what Jesus experienced, which includes the experience of conscious separation from the Father. So whatever death is and whatever hell is, Jesus experienced the full dose of that. And so that is just one of the reasons. I did receive an article I read. I don't think the arguments in the article get the author, make the point the author wants them to make. And so in some future broadcasts, I will deal with that article in terms of, I don't think you get there from those arguments. I don't think they say what you think they're saying. But we need to understand that Jesus's death and what death is will affect our understanding of the atonement, because our understanding of the atonement is directly tied to Jesus taking that penalty. And so you really can't separate one from the other real easily. They're connected somehow. And Jesus gave us the best understanding of what death was, because he's the only one who died and came back again. So if I want to know about the afterlife, Jesus is a pretty good person to get that from. Now, a Jewish person would never get it from that place, because understand, Jewish people today don't believe in Jesus. So they're not going to look to Jesus for their answers. But I think we should, because we do believe Jesus paid the penalty. But Jeff, you're making too much of Jesus. You just said Jewish people don't get it from that. Look, I don't think that it's wrong, if we're looking through the Bible through a messianic lens, to apply that lens even to our view of death. So I'm Christocentric in my doctrine. I believe that Jesus does ultimately give us the key to a lot of doctrine, because doctrine was meant to point to him anyway, in the sense of the messianic lens. So while the interpretation is centered in the historic context, okay, the significance of a doctrine may be seen to its connection to God's plan of salvation. And that's why I made an interesting comment on my Facebook, that although doctrine is understood forward, its significance might be understood backward. There's a quote by Soren Kierkegaard that I like: life must be lived forward, but can only be understood backward. I think there's a sense in which the significance of doctrine may be understood through a Christological lens, while the interpretation is understood through the authorial intent. So, am I going to look at this article? Yeah, if you give me an article, I actually have to analyze it, think about it, and critique it. Not to be obnoxious, but I think that the author doesn't get where he wants to go. So regardless of where you believe, that's where I'm coming from. I think Jesus's death really is a key. I do want to clarify something. I want to be fair to those who hold a more annihilationistic view. Annihilation is known as conditional immortality, and it doesn't affect the body. So when I say annihilationism, I refer to the fact that the idea is that the soul of the wicked does not continue, because the immortality of man is something that is not intrinsic to the image of God in man. So that's just to separate body from soul. But I believe that Jesus had a human. This is going to sound weird, but I think he had a human soul. I don't think, like some of the ancient heresies, that Jesus only appeared to be human. That would be Docetism. And he didn't have an actual human nature. And I believe that if Jesus' human nature include both a body and a human soul, then whatever the human soul is, Jesus had one. And whatever death involves, that's what it looks like. So that's kind of my answer to that. Will I be dealing with this again? Yeah, not immediately. But yes. He says, Misophite thought Jesus, if Jesus lost his human nature, yeah, that is a problem. That particular heresy was that Jesus only had one nature, not two. We believe in the hypostatic union, which means that Jesus had a human nature, okay, and a divine nature. And that the human nature and that divine nature existed fully. And the Council of Chalcedon says without mixture, without confusion. It just goes to define that further and make that real clear. And I'm not going to try to recite the Chalcedon Creed at this point, at this time of night. But there were ancient heresies around this. Whatever a human being was, spiritually and physically, Jesus had. And whatever God is, Jesus possessed. And that's what we mean by the hypostatic union. Well, a small crowd, but I think a really worthwhile topic to discuss. Yes, Jesus tasted hell and death. And whatever hell and death were, we see that at the cross. And we see that in what happened to him. And so we believe in an atonement where Jesus took on the penalty. And then my more reformed individuals can get a little mad at me for looking at every man as being every man in Hebrews, where it's pentos. But I think we can solve that problem with the distinction between efficiency and sufficiency. So we did not get all the way through the actual crucifixion scene. We'll look more at the fulfillment of prophecy as we get past Jesus's actual crucifixion and we look at the conditions. We'll move fairly probably quick through that and maybe even into the resurrection and the meaning of that, because that is more fulfillment of prophecy and the actual providing of the atonement. And we'll end up examining some of those things. Well, I'm grateful for everyone here. Again, if you support us another way, that's great. If people who see this later are not patrons, I'm going to encourage it. And if there are any questions or comments, I welcome them. But that's just the lens that I'm looking through tonight. So, well, thank you for the faithful folks who tuned in. I thought Elizabeth would be here because she asked me whether we were going on, and I said yes. But things happen. So I understand that. And I hope it was interesting. Well, barring any questions or comments, let me thank everybody. We very much appreciate it. We're looking for additional faith partners, but I want to thank the folks that have been such a part of things here. Okay, well, the clip moved a little quicker than I thought. And so I'll just let people know. You all kind of know. I do want to say I am freer to travel. Someone mentioned Northern Indiana. I would love to get there, either meet with you for a meal, do a house meeting. I'd love to meet some of the people in your church or where you attend. Talk to your pastor, have coffee with your pastor. Maybe he doesn't know me yet. That's fine. I could get to know him. So there's a number and an email. We do plan to be out there possibly in March for Purim. So if you think your congregation would enjoy a Purim message, we probably could work that in. Well, a shout out to everybody here. I'm going to go back to comments. And I got to thank you. I really appreciate that. And I'm going to say Erev Tov. I'm sorry that some of the programs have been a little shorter, but that won't always be the case. I just wanted to deal with the Prick of Beast. So God bless and Erev Tov.